Imagine finding out the person you're about to vote for has a secret life that includes a 20-year-old Nazi tattoo and a habit of texting explicit messages on an app meant for kids.
I mean, normally a revelation like that just completely destroys a political campaign, right? Like before the sun even goes down.
Yeah, absolutely. But the normal rules of political gravity are just, they're completely suspended right now.
Oh, for sure.
Because we are looking at the Senate race in Maine, and it has suddenly exploded into this massive national spectacle.
It really has.
You have the Democratic candidate, Graham Platner, who is just buried under an avalanche of fresh, bizarre scandals.
Yeah.
And he's challenging the Republican incumbent, Susan Collins.
Right. And the stakes here are huge. Control of the entire United States Senate literally hangs in the balance.
Exactly, meaning this chaotic local race could actually decide the national balance of power.
It's wild. So to figure out how this happens, we are pulling from a massive stack of sources for this deep dive today. We've got campaign internals, historical polling, and notably, some highly critical, heavily partisan, right-leaning YouTube commentary.
And we should explicitly say right up front, we aren't here to take a political side or, endorse any of these specific right-wing views.
Right, no endorsements here.
We are just going to impartially report the facts and dissect the politically charged arguments presented in these sources.
Exactly. Our mission is to see exactly how this local chaos shifts the national power grid, and really why voters are suddenly forced into this brutal choice between demanding personal character and, well, securing raw political power.
So to understand why the national map is shifting, we first have to look at the sheer volume of baggage Graham Platner is dragging into this election.
Oh, it is a mountain of baggage.
Because this isn't just like a standard political gaffe. It's a cascading series of controversies, and it starts with a tattoo. Platner apparently had a Nazi symbol tattooed on his body for 2 decades.
Yeah, and 2 decades is a very long time to overlook a hate symbol.
Right.
His primary defense is basically ignorance. He claims he simply didn't know what the symbol meant when he got it.
I mean, I find that incredibly hard to swallow. And looking at the right-leaning commentary in our materials, they completely reject that defense.
Oh, entirely.
They point out this critical timeline issue. Even after he allegedly discovered the meaning of the tattoo, it still took him years to finally get it removed.
Right. And because of that delay, these commentators are flat out labeling him an anti-Semite.
Yeah.
The delay is the mechanism that turns a youthful mistake into a full-blown character indictment. Because when a candidate learns they have a hate symbol on them and responds with zero urgency, it signals to voters and critics that the ideology doesn't genuinely bother them.
Wow, yeah.
But the crazy part is, the tattoo is actually just the baseline of his problems. The data shifts dramatically when we look at the texting scandal.
Right. So he is accused of cheating on his wife and sending dozens of sexually explicit text messages. But the infidelity itself isn't what makes this so nuclear.
No, it's the platform.
Exactly. He was allegedly sending these explicit texts on an app called Kik.
And that is the pivotal detail here. For anyone unfamiliar, Kik is not like a standard dating app or a secure messaging service for adults.
At all.
It's a platform heavily populated by young teenagers and gamers.
So it moves the needle from a standard story of a politician having an affair, which unfortunately voters are pretty used to, into a territory that feels incredibly predatory.
It completely changes the psychology of the scandal. You start wondering why an adult man running for federal office is, prowling around an app designed for kids.
Exactly the point. It introduces this massive ick factor that just alienates his own base.
You can see the internal damage immediately. Even Senator John Fetterman, a fellow Democrat, publicly called Platner a creep.
A creep, wow.
Yeah. And the conservative commentators, they're calling his behavior weird and freaky.
And perhaps the most damaging structural blow to his campaign is how this information actually leaked.
Oh, this is the worst part for him.
His own wife handed the messages over. She literally gave the evidence to his campaign team to warn them about what was coming.
Which completely neutralizes the campaign's best defensive weapon.
Right. Because usually you just blame the other side.
Exactly. When a scandal breaks, the default political playbook is to call it a partisan witch hunt, or fake news, or attack the source's credibility.
But you cannot run that playbook when the source of the leak is the candidate's own spouse.
No, you can't. The call is coming from inside the house.
And the right-wing commentators are piling on other allegations, too. They're accusing him of racist remarks toward African Americans, labeling his past behavior homophobic.
And they argue his entire public persona, this rugged, masculine aura he projects, is completely fabricated.
Yeah, they point to this recently surfaced internet search history that is apparently highly problematic.
And just think about the mechanical effect of all that on a campaign. When your media cycle is dominated by explaining a 20-year-old tattoo, a youth messaging app, and an embarrassing internet search history.
You aren't talking about your policies.
Exactly. You are no longer communicating your vision. You're not talking about healthcare or the economy. You are trapped in a defensive spiral.
It sounds like building a house on a foundation of dynamite. How does a candidate with this much explosive baggage even make it this far in a major election?
Well, it's incredibly tough. And these scandals aren't just bad PR. They are actively destroying his numbers and threatening his party's national strategy.
We can actually see that structural damage in the data. The numbers here are just plunging fast.
The data paints a picture of absolute freefall. Let's start with the immediate public reaction tracked by Google Trends.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Over a 3-day period, right as these scandals hit critical mass, searches for Platner skyrocketed 275% compared to his 3-month average.
275%. And that spike hit its absolute peak on a Sunday.
Right.
So people were sitting at home, digesting the Sunday news shows, and actively searching for information about these explicit texts and the tattoo.
It proves the electorate isn't numb to this. They are paying close attention to the sheer weirdness of the story.
And that attention is burning down his chances in real time. Look at the prediction markets. He dropped from a 70% favorite down to a 59% chance of winning in just 10 days.
10 days is a blink of an eye in a Senate race. And we should probably clarify how prediction markets differ from standard polling for a second.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Unlike traditional polls where a surveyor just asks a random person who they plan to vote for, prediction markets are basically Wall Street for politics. People are betting actual money on the outcome of the race.
Right, so these investors aggregate all the available information, scandals, the leaks, the momentum, and put their cash on the line.
Exactly. So when his odds plummet from 70 to 59%, it means people who analyze risk for a living are rapidly pulling their money out of the Platner campaign.
It represents a total collapse in confidence. And this localized collapse in Maine introduces a concept the analysts in our materials call the Platner tax.
The Platner tax. It's such a fascinating term.
It really is. It suggests his baggage is so heavy, he is actually taxing Democrats in entirely different states. Like, how does a scandal in Maine impact a Senate race across the country?
Because it changes the national map. Look, 2 months ago, the national map looked like a strict 50-50 split between Republicans and Democrats.
Basically a coin toss.
Exactly, a coin toss for who would control the Senate. Maine was supposed to be a relatively reliable win for the Democrats.
Right.
But because Platner is actively self-destructing, national Democratic donors and strategists have to pour emergency money and resources into Maine just to keep him afloat.
Money that they desperately need in places like Ohio or Montana.
Precisely. The Platner tax is the opportunity cost of his scandals. Because of the chaos he created, Republicans are now slightly favored to take the national majority.
Wow.
His personal flaws are making a tough path for his party incredibly treacherous.
But, you know, the data gets even weirder when you look at the actual polling in Maine. Because before the worst of these scandals broke, Platner's opponent, Susan Collins, was down by about 10 points.
Which is usually fatal.
Yeah, normally a 10-point deficit in late October is a death sentence for an incumbent.
On paper, a 10-point gap looks insurmountable. But the analysts looking at this race issue a massive warning about trusting Maine polling data.
Why is that?
Because historically, polls massively underestimate Susan Collins.
The statistics on this are just wild. In 2008, the polls underestimated her final vote count by 8 points.
Right.
In 2014, they missed her by 12 points. And in 2020, they underestimated her by another 12 points.
Which is huge. And it requires us to understand why a specific politician consistently breaks the polling models like that.
Yeah.
This usually comes down to structural sampling issues and voter psychology. Maine has a large rural population that can be notoriously difficult for pollsters to reach.
Plus, there's the shy voter phenomenon, right?
Yeah.
People who plan to vote for her, but simply refuse to admit it to a stranger on the phone.
Exactly. So when you combine that documented history of the shy Collins voter with Platner's active self-destruction, the race tightens significantly.
Definitely.
If she is down by 10 points on paper, but historically overperforms by 12 points on election day, she's actually operating with a hidden advantage.
See, I have to push back on those prediction markets then.
Okay, let's hear it.
If Susan Collins consistently beats her poll numbers by 8 to 12 points, and Platner is only sitting at a 59% chance right now, aren't those prediction markets basically ignoring history?
That is a very valid critique.
I mean, that 59% seems incredibly fragile.
It really does. Prediction markets react violently to current news sentiment, right?
Right.
But they sometimes fail to weigh historical structural advantages.
Right.
The investors see Platner still holding a slight lead in the raw polling averages, but they might not be factoring in Maine's historical habit of just quietly re-electing Susan Collins, regardless of what they tell pollsters.
So we have a candidate with tanking data, an avalanche of personal scandals, and a historical polling disadvantage.
Yeah.
The National Party is bleeding resources.
Yeah.
Normally, this is the exact moment when you expect the party leadership to intervene. You expect them to march into his office and force him to drop out.
But they aren't.
No. Looking at these materials, the exact opposite is happening. They are digging in.
This is what the commentators highlight as the ultimate triumph of political tribalism. The traditional rules of political survival, where a massive scandal disqualifies you from public service, are being completely overwritten by negative partisanship.
Negative partisanship.
Oh.
The idea that modern voting is driven more by a deep fear of the opposing party than any actual love for your own candidate.
Exactly.
And we see this vividly in the interviews with Maine voters from our sources. One voter openly admitted they will, quote, grit their teeth and vote for Platner anyway.
That phrase is incredibly revealing, isn't it?
It really is.
Gritting their teeth acknowledges the physical and moral distaste of the choice. They know he is a flawed, potentially toxic candidate, but their loyalty to the party's broader goals just overrides their personal disgust.
Yeah, and another voter tried to rationalize it by separating his personal life from his politics, basically arguing that texting teenagers on Kick doesn't impact how he will vote on tax policy.
All right.
And then there's a voter who just sounded completely defeated. They said Platner's disappointed them again and again, but concluded, quote, there's no one else left to vote for.
That sheer resignation is the hallmark of a polarized two-party system. Voters feel trapped.
Yeah, they do.
But the party leadership is also trapped, by their own pursuit of power. The way national figures are dodging questions about Platner is just a masterclass in political deflection.
Take Senator Tim Kaine. Reporters cornered him and asked directly if he was comfortable having a potential colleague with a Nazi tattoo.
And what did he say?
Kaine completely refused to give a straight answer. He just kept repeating that it was up to the Maine voters.
By deferring entirely to the local voters, Kaine washes his hands of the moral question.
Exactly.
He avoids taking a definitive stance on Platner's character, effectively outsourcing the ethical judgment to the citizens of Maine.
And Chuck Schumer's reaction was even more robotic. Reporters hammered him with direct questions about the explicit texts and the racist allegations.
Right.
He completely ignored the premise of every single question. He just repeated the exact same phrase on a loop, we're going to beat Susan Collins and take back the Senate.
That repetition is a calculated firewall. It's designed to starve the scandal of oxygen. By refusing to acknowledge Platner's behavior, Schumer keeps the media's focus entirely on the acquisition of power. The morality of the candidate is irrelevant to them. The only metric that matters to the leadership is capturing that Senate seat.
Which brings us to a really fascinating clip in our stack from commentator Sunny Hostin. She provides the ultimate justification for this mindset.
She really does.
She goes down the list of allegations and openly admits that Platner is a liar. She admits he is a cheater. She admits he made racist remarks. She even calls him a homophobe.
She concedes every single negative premise about his character. She doesn't even try to defend his actions at all.
No, she leans into them. But then she turns around and justifies supporting him anyway.
Right.
She argues that stopping President Trump and securing checks and balances in the government is simply more important than Platner's character flaws.
This perfectly encapsulates the core thesis of negative partisanship. The overarching desire to counter the power of the opposing party's leader completely outweighs any local candidate's history of lying, racism, or, explicit behavior. The local election is no longer about Maine. It is entirely nationalized.
And the right-leaning commentators analyzing this clip point out a massive, glaring double standard here.
Oh, yeah.
They argue that if a Republican candidate had a 20-year Nazi tattoo and a texting scandal on an app designed for kids, Democrats would claim a moral imperative and demand that they drop out immediately.
And the commentators use this double standard to argue that the party lacks a true moral foundation. They suggest the party is operating purely on partisan desperation.
Right.
The voters aren't actually voting for Graham Platner. They are voting against the opposing national leader. Platner is just the imperfect vehicle they are forced to use.
It's like hiring a known bank robber to work as your accountant just because you hate the other applicant. At what point does voting for the lesser of two evils completely erase the baseline for political character?
Well, it creates a race to the bottom. If personal integrity is no longer a prerequisite for office, the quality of candidates will continually degrade because the system just no longer punishes bad behavior.
So what does this all mean for you listening to this right now? Let's bring all this data and commentary together.
Yeah, let's summarize.
We're watching a major political candidate, Graham Platner, drown in a flood of bizarre and severe personal scandals. A 20-year Nazi tattoo he somehow ignored. Explicit texts sent to young women on a youth gaming app. Serious accusations of racism and homophobia.
And we've analyzed how these scandals severely damaged his polling, caused his prediction market odds to plummet, and created a Platner tax that is shifting the national Senate forecast toward the opposing party.
Yet, despite the data tanking and the obvious moral baggage, party leadership and everyday voters are stubbornly digging in.
They really are.
They're choosing to look past the character of the man on the ballot, focusing entirely on the raw power his seat represents in Washington.
It exposes a modern political environment where defeating the opposing tribe matters infinitely more than the integrity of the candidate you actually field.
And this matters to you whether you live in the state of Maine or thousands of miles away.
Exactly.
Because this single race proves that national politics has completely swallowed our local elections. You are no longer just picking a qualified person to represent your town or your state's interests. Voters are now being asked to weigh the moral character of their local representative against the raw, immense power of the federal government.
It transforms every local race into a national proxy war. And in a proxy war, the individual soldier's flaws are often completely ignored, as long as they can just manage to hold the line for the party.
Which leaves us with one final, deeply unsettling question to chew on as we wrap up this deep dive. If an explicit texting scandal on a youth app, a 20-year Nazi tattoo, and bipartisan condemnation from your own colleagues still aren't enough to make a political party drop a candidate, what actually is the breaking point for a modern political campaign?
It's a great question.
If you can carry all that toxic secret baggage and still secure the votes, does a disqualifying scandal even exist anymore?